Right. So in the previous example, we used a statement. Okay. We got a connection from the driver. Then we got a statement from the connection. We got a connection from the driver. We got a statement from the connection, and then we got a result set from the statement. Right. So we are going to instead of using just the plain old statement, instead we're going to be using what is called a prepared statement. Right. The problem with the current implementation is that this is a string. Okay. Now there's nothing wrong with this particular string, but when you start building these strings using concatenation, like for instance, somebody types in something in the command in some UI user interface, right? And then you parse the values that come in from that user interface. What you do is that you start creating these strings concatenated with whatever the user typed in the user interface, right? And that's very dangerous because users can type strings in those input fields, right? That can be used to inject SQL into your unintended SQL into your strings. Assuming that you are using concatenation, right? So we want to avoid this way of building strings. Instead, we want to treat the values that are coming from the user interface. We want to treat them in the correct data types. If they're dates, then we want to make sure they're dates. If they're integers, if we're expecting integers, then we want to make sure these are integers, right? So we want to sanitize, right, any data that is coming from the clients whenever folks are typing things from the command from an input fields, right? So instead of using statements, we're going to be using prepared statements, right? That are useful for avoiding SQL injection, right? So let's look at an example. Here's a joke from XKCD where the mother gets a call from the school saying, we're having some trouble with the computer. And says, oh dear, did my son break something? It says, well, in a way. So the school says, did you really name your son? And this says Robert, quote, close parentheses, semicolon, drop, table, students, semicolon, dash, dash, question mark. Like somebody would literally actually type that into a user interface, right? This would be concatenated at the end of some a SQL statement, and it would be executed, right? It would close the previous one, and it would then execute the next one and drop any tables in the students. It says, so the mother says, oh yeah, we little Bobby tables we call my son. It says, well, we've just lost this year's student records. I hope you're happy. And the mother says, well, I hope you learn to sanitize your database inputs, right? So be careful that we want to make sure that we sanitize any data that we come through. So prepared statements allows us to sanitize it in a way that we can use high-level data types, right? If it's a date that we're expecting, right, it validates that indeed it's a date that you're giving us, right? That it's not some bogus string, right? That can be and it's very easy to use. Just in the where you would have in your SQL statements where you would be concatenating using concatenation. Instead, you declare placeholders, right, with the question marks. And then you let prepared statements to do the insertion of the injection of the actual data, right, into that query. Right? So in this case, we are injecting a string into the question mark, and this works with dates, integers, with all the data types supported by SQL. So let's go back and modify this just a little bit. So for instance, if we wanted to do, select star from developer where username equals, and then the placeholder. So typically we would plus and concatenate the actual username, right? So instead of doing that, we declare a placeholder that then we will fill in at a later time, right? So to use prepared statements, instead of using this statement right here, we're not going to do that, and instead we're going to say connection dot, instead of create statement, it is prepare statement, right? And you pass in the string, and this what returns is not a statement; it returns a prepared statement. Okay, and we need to import it. Let's import it, not the MySQL version, right? It's the Java.SQL version. Now that we have the statement, we want to fill in the value for this query, right? We want to say that statement dot set the string, right? For the placeholder, set the placeholder, and these are by index. The first one, the second one, the third. You can have any number of parameterized placeholders. So the first one, yes.
So if you have like a string and a number and a string, would you say set string like the second string or the third?
Yep, exactly. Yep.
No, like is it the second or the third? Like what number do you put if the string is the third question mark but it's the second string?
So the index is the place where the question mark falls,
even
right?
If in between there are things that are not strings.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the index is always the position, the relative position starting from, and also they're indexed at 1, not indexed at 0. Okay, so careful, right? Normally everything in programming is indexed at 0. In JDBC and prepared statement is indexed at 1. So yeah, so that's the first one, and I want to convert it, want to inject Alice, or so actually lowercase Alice. Right? And then I want to execute the query, but not SQL. Right? It already has the query. It already has the query. So I do not want to execute it. If I would have given the SQL there, it would have treated it like a normal query, right? Like a statement query, right? It would have probably complained because it sees a question mark. Right? It sees a question mark and would have given me an error message saying you got a syntax error with a question mark. But I'm here saying use a query that you already know about, right? The one that you prepared for, and then you can run it here. Yes.
So how will this avoid injecting?
It does checks for backslashes or weird characters in there.
So if you have a semicolon.
Yeah. Right. Also, one of the good things about this is that if you want to reuse the statement, right, you can just use the same exact statement, but change the parameters. Right, it's been already compiled. Right, it already the database already has a plan for that statement. Right, it doesn't have to recompile every time. Instead of you using the regular statement, right, every time you instantiate a brand new one, it has to recompile the statement. Right, even if it's the same exact string. Right, it needs to recompile that string. Prepared statements allow you to go much faster. Right, it caches all that, so you can just reuse the same statement. Right, so if you want to do operations with one user and then with another user, the same exact one, but just change the username. Right, you can just reconfigure it, setting a different string. Right, but it's the same plan, it's the same compile statement. So yeah, so they're much more efficient. So yeah, so this one is going to return Alice. So if we run, this just returns Alice. Okay. It doesn't return the other one. All right. Okay. Awesome. Let's stop that.